Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Public Lecture Series, Spring 2015, UHI Public Lecture on Our Culture. But today is not an ordinary public lecture, it's an inaugural professorial lecture. And I'm very, very pleased to say that one of our new professors, Professor Keith Smythe, is presenting the talk tonight. I'm going to introduce Keith briefly just in a minute. Could I just, for those of us on VC, just point out that we're recording the lecture, just to make sure, and indeed everyone here as well, make sure you're aware of that. Could I ask you on VC to make sure your mics are muted, please? And can I also warn those of you on VC that we can see you? Keith joined UHI as Professor of Pedagogy, and I'll leave Keith himself to perhaps explain what pedagogy is, at the end of July 2014. And since then he's been based at Murray College, UHI in Elgin, but he's been working across the UHI partnership to lead and support strategic learning and teaching developments, funded educational research projects, and staff engagement in educational scholarship and research. So you've managed to escape your inaugural lecture for quite a while, but Keith has been very, very busy. Particular focus initially on leading the development of our new institutional framework for across the partnership, recognising good practice in learning and teaching, and through that open up routes to fellowship of the Higher Education Academy for staff across the partnership who are engaging in curriculum development and innovation. He's been taking forward UHI's Learning and Teaching Academy, which is a network structure bringing together staff and development opportunities and curriculum development across the partnership. And that will include activity that in due course is going to move into the Education Research and Development Lab that will be part of the Beechwood campus development in Inverness. He's been working to draw UHI colleagues and external partners together on a number of educational research funding bids, and he's been working on a project called eTips, producing online research method textbooks for students, not just here at UHI but across Scotland as well. All of this is extremely important to us as an institution. We seek to be an innovative institution in terms of learning and teaching, but not to be innovative just for the sake of being innovative. We want to use innovation in design and delivery of curriculum and the use of technology to bring opportunity to learners right across what is our large and very challenging geographical campus. Working in partnership with and supporting not just our teaching staff but also our students and helping them to develop their skills in engaging with new forms of curriculum design and delivery. And we want to be through that seen as world-leading, genuinely world-leading, in developing effective new approaches to the delivery of higher and further education. We want to build pedagogy, pedagogical research, as a key part as well of the research identity and activity of the university. And in that context, Keith's appointment at professorial level is only one of a number of senior academic appointments, the other appointments being in traditional academic disciplines that we're making to help to support and facilitate the continued development of the strength and the staff resource that we already have across the partnership, to give that additional leadership that is going to help us to move forward and mature and achieve more and more across all cognate disciplines. And I think you'll see in Keith's presentation that the use of technology to underpin teaching, a lot of those approaches can be used to underpin activity in other areas of endeavour, whether that is business, university management or research across distributed groups, geographically distributed basis. So Keith represents part of a very deliberate and structured approach to strengthen the university, and we're very lucky to be able to attract individuals like Keith to the institution, and we're increasingly doing that and bringing in high calibre individuals with considerable track record around teaching and research to join us, not simply because they see us as an interesting laboratory, which we are, but they see us as providing an excellent environment within which to apply their own skills and knowledge gained earlier on in their career and use that to develop their understanding, their practice, their standing further, but also bring direct benefit to us and help us to achieve our mission through their expertise. Keith has been very active as a researcher. He has a large number of research publications in education and pedagogy, and he's widely regarded as a leader in that field, engaging with other institutions, both on a collaborative basis, but also at times on a consultancy basis, to share his expertise with them. We're lucky because we get that built in to our structures. We can take that across our partnership. And pedagogical research, as I've said, is something that we hope Keith is going to help through the Learning Teaching Academy, through our professional development framework, through our relationship with the Higher Education Academy. We hope he is going to help to bring significant numbers of our teaching staff into being active pedagogical researchers and published and world-renowned in their own right. Keith is, say a little bit about his own academic background. He's Edinburgh born and bred, nothing wrong with that. I can share that particular attribute. And he's made a decision, though, having worked in the Central Belt, I think all of your professional life, to move himself and his family, who are all here tonight, up to Nairn, lock, stock and barrel. Outside of work, his spare time, he says, is taken up by having a young family, 4 children, I think. Yep. Being a keen but terrible guitar player, I think we probably could find some fault with that, and a slow but enthusiastic runner. And he's vowed never again, after running the Edinburgh Marathon 2 years ago, he would never do it again, but he is contemplating the Inverness Marathon next year, and I would advise you to just keep contemplating it, keep it at that level. But Keith's own background, having been brought up in Edinburgh, is interesting to us as well. His education was through what was then Queen Margaret College in Edinburgh, as an undergraduate in information management, managing to graduate top of his year despite what he himself describes as a shaky start. I haven't asked you to elaborate on that.
Well, he won't elaborate on that.
And he then, so that is Queen Margaret University as it is now. That was, not at that time one of the established universities. That was a relatively new higher education provider. He was studying, like us, a relatively new, innovative, forward-facing university. He then undertook a PhD in education and network learning with the Open University through Queen Margaret College, whilst also lecturing on a range of courses, including research methods. And he then worked at Edinburgh Napier University, first as an academic development advisor in online learning, then as a lecturer in higher education, and then a senior teaching fellow and senior lecturer in higher education within the Office of the Vice Principal Academic. So he's moved rapidly through a relatively new university, developing its own role in terms of innovation, in terms of its own strategy, in terms of the use of digital technologies to explore new markets, make itself accessible to learners in just the same way that we now are. So there's real parallels, and I'm sorry to those of you from Napier here today, but we're very glad we've spoken to you so recently. And we will learn a lot from what he has learned through working with you. But I do mean that in a very positive way. And part of that, it's part of what Keith brings to the institution then, is a networking. It's an engagement with colleagues in these other universities in Scotland, that we can continue to engage with them. And indeed, some of that eTips project and some of the online publication is being done very much in collaboration with those other institutions. Even yesterday, I was down in Edinburgh at Napier, having dialogue with one of the visitors here today from Napier. Keith's also in his own time been involved with a number of education and social inclusion charities. He's been Vice Chair of the Board of Directors for LEAD, Linking Education and Disability, and is currently a trustee of the social innovation charity People Know How. And I think to me this is another indication of why Keith is such a good appointment for UHI. A big part of our mission is to make our curriculum accessible on a fair and equivalent basis across all sectors of our community, both geographical and in terms of people's social or life backgrounds that they're coming into. Education, I'm sure Keith would call himself an educationalist as well as an educator. Education is not just a job, it's not just a research subject, it is a vocation. And it does make a genuine difference to people's lives and futures. And digital practice helps us to do that. And Keith, I think now, is going to give us some insight into how and why it helps us to do that. So, Keith, please take the floor.
Just check them out. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Crichton, for that lovely introduction. And thank you for everyone who's come along tonight. It's been really kind of pleasing and to see so many friends from the past year today, a number of new colleagues, a number of people who I haven't met yet and who've decided this is a good punt for their Tuesday night this week. So it's a real pleasure. Before I start my talk tonight, I just want to acknowledge a few people. Usually we do thanks at the end, but there are a number of people here tonight that are actually really kind of pivotal to me in terms of being in higher education and being in the role that I'm in just now. I think from Queen Margaret, we've got Kathy Buckner and Jim Herring, who saw me through undergraduate and postgraduate studies. So thanks very much indeed for coming. Fred Percival, I think, is Fred. My boss at Napier, who allowed me to do lots of things that were really interesting and perhaps on the fringes of what I should have been doing, but I've learned so much from that. But there's other people as well that I really should thank. Andrew Comrie, who I worked with on a big cross-institutional project I'll talk about tonight, and also Karen Aitchison, who was my boss in the last few years at Napier, and who again was absolutely fantastic at turning a blind eye to things that were kind of on the fringes of what we should have been doing, but were really important in terms of education and how we develop it. I've had a number of co-conspirators in these slightly off-the-wall projects, chief amongst which is my friend Julia Fotheringham, and also Christina Minka and Norrie Brown. So a number of people here that I'm really grateful to see, and other people that will get a mention as we go along, but you only get one mention. So, Crichton asked me to explain what pedagogy is. I think it's quite a contested word. I think probably the definition we'll work with tonight is it's about the practice and the development of learning and teaching, and perhaps a scholarship of learning and teaching as well, how we research what we do, how we make it better. And I'll maybe come back to some of those themes as I go along. Someone has rather usefully got rid of my presentation, so I'll just pull that back up. There we go. Okay. So what I'd like to talk about tonight is an idea that's really close to me in terms of my own professional practice, but also in terms of some of the wider interests and things I care about, many of which Crichton has mentioned. So we're going to look at the idea of third space and how it applies in particular to universities and what we do, the communities that we sit within and we try to engage our students with, and also where digital practice can come to play an increasingly important part in how we think about and conceptualise university and what we try to do. There are a number of things that I would like to address this evening. The first I've touched upon, the idea of third space as it applies to education. But I also want to spend some time exploring what's happening in schools right now in terms of learning and teaching and digital practice, and why it's so important to HE, and why it also presents us with a challenge that we have to rise to really quite quickly. I would like to look at how we encourage our academic colleagues to make more effective use of digital spaces and tools, building upon the good practice that we see across many of our institutions. And I'd also like to look at the broader possibilities around using digital tools and spaces for how we engage our learners. And then we'll conclude by looking at what digital third space might mean to us as practitioners, as educators, in terms of enhancing our own practice, but also our own scholarship around learning and teaching. And then finally, looking at the wider implications for universities in general, but also for UHI. Before I proceed, I'd like to present two framing propositions, as I've called them. These are two things, two viewpoints that are really dear to me and underpin the ways in which I think about the use of technology and the purpose of universities. You don't have to agree with these. It would be really interesting if you didn't when we get to the discussion. But these are just two things that set the context for some of what I'm going to talk about tonight. The first is that I really strongly believe that the most effective uses of technology aren't about delivering content, although that is very important, but they're about providing spaces to allow people to create and to allow them to engage with each other, to engage with themselves, to engage with the broader communities that they aspire to join, both professional and more general. The second framing proposition is that while I believe online technology is absolutely key to inclusive education and open educational practice, we need to refocus the current debate around open education away from being almost exclusively about technology and online opportunities, to also come back and look at how we use our physical spaces and locations. And I think there's something really pivotal happening around technology at the moment in education. And if we're going to realise the promise of it, when we think open, we need to think about not just the online, but the on-campus and in the community as well. First of all, I should explain the concept of third space. I know that a number of people in the audience tonight are familiar with this, some very familiar. The idea of third space, sometimes called third place, has been around for a while in sociology and in psychology and social research. Probably the best known definition of it, and probably the definitive text, is Ray Oldenburg's book, The Great Good Place: Cafes, Coffee Shops, Bookstores, Bars, Hair Salons, and other hangouts at the heart of our community. The whole notion of a third space is about those spaces in our community where people can come together around shared interests, shared goals, differences, where they can come together without carrying any baggage around who they are or their experience, where they can come together to meet a collective good very often. It might be a shared goal, or it might just be a kind of broad interest that they all share together, and where they can potentially meet people that they otherwise might not get the opportunity to meet. Now, these are some of the key characteristics of third spaces. As Oldenburg originally conceptualized it, over the years, there's been a lot of discussion about the notion of third space in relation to technology, and I'll say a little bit about that. But two of the things that are quite relevant to our sort of how we might think about digital third spaces is that they can bring together people that otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to meet because they're geographically dispersed, for example. And also, when we talk about digital third spaces, these kind of safe spaces online, these alternative spaces for people to engage, quite often we can look at the potential for issues within that third space to be amplified out with it when we're looking at online interaction and engagement. Again, I'll say a little bit more about this, but there's some of the basic characteristics. And I think probably the ones that are most important to me is that third spaces provide a neutral ground where difference is embraced and where social status and what you're bringing in is valued but are relevant in terms of who you are, in terms of you being judged as a person or an individual. So a definition for tonight, just to put in context what I'm about to talk about. When we think about third spaces in relation to education, the working definition I want to use tonight is that third spaces are spaces or annexes, to borrow a word from my friend Alex Dunedin, that extend our opportunities for engaging with learners within the university, but also beyond the university. They can be digital, or they can be physical. There's spaces that allow us to make connections between different groups of learners within and beyond the university, allow our students to connect with the wider communities they belong to, and I'm using the word student there quite purposely. Those that are registered who are in the university can allow them to connect with the wider communities they're aspiring to join. And also, third spaces in education terms also are about allowing universities to better connect with the communities within which we sit. And that's where we can talk about both the digital and the physical, and I'll come back to that. Now, I should say that a lot of what's about to follow is going to be hopelessly optimistic. Some of it might be a little bit cynical at points, but largely hopelessly optimistic. And I don't make any apologies for that, because I think we should be aspirational how we think about some of these issues. My heart's not on my sleeve. It would be on my lapel if it wasn't for this microphone. So a forewarning of some of what's about to follow. I'd like to start by looking at what's happening in our schools around learning and teaching generally, and also digital practice, and why it's so important to us in higher education. And I'd like to pause and think about what's happening in the Scottish context around the Curriculum for Excellence. I know there'll be a number of people in the room that are very familiar with this, are knowledgeable about it. The Curriculum for Excellence has had its critics as well as its supporters. But I'd like to focus on the implications for how our learners, how our young people are learning in school. Because when it's implemented well, where it's being implemented well, they're having really quite a different experience from the one they might expect when they get into some universities. Not exclusively, but really quite a different experience in some situations. So the Curriculum for Excellence is based around 4 dimensions of successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens, effective contributors. And when we look at what these things mean in practice, just to pick out a few, enabling our learners to think creatively and independently, to develop the literacy, communication and numeracy skills. These are things that we would expect. But when you bring that into combination with working in partnerships and in teams, taking the initiative to lead, to create things, to create resources, not just rely upon the resources we provide them with, to create artifacts, then it really becomes quite interesting. And where the Curriculum for Excellence is working well, it's engaging our learners in what we might kind of call maker pedagogies, or learning and teaching approaches that put the onus on our learners as creators to create things collectively, individually, and for a purpose, usually not just how they're assessed, but usually what they want to communicate, their own personal development. We can see variations on this around what we sometimes call digital maker pedagogy, where the focus there is on them as digital creators and makers and contributors to creating artifacts, online bodies of knowledge, a whole range of things. This, I think, is really quite interesting because for me, what's happening in schools at the moment, and we see this beyond Scotland, across the whole primary and secondary sector and other countries as well, there's really quite a focus on some of what we would consider in education, in higher education, progressive pedagogical practice, I think. In many schools, it's not progressive, it's the norm. And I think we've got a challenge there that we need to address, and I'll come back to that. The implications of how learners are being engaged in school and what they're being asked to do was brought home to ourselves a couple of years ago through the most unexpected source that you could imagine. Sonny Bean. Now, there's a few people laughing. Can I just have a show of hands if you know who Sonny Bean is? A few people. Sonny Bean was reputedly a cave-dwelling cannibal who lived on the west coast of Scotland in the 15th or 16th century. This is where it's disputed, no one's quite sure. And him and his family robbed passers-by of their possessions and everything else they had on them as a means of sustaining themselves. Now, why did Sonny Bean teach me about the Curriculum for Excellence? Well, he taught me about the Curriculum for Excellence because one day one of our daughters came home from school and said, we're doing a project about Scottish folklore and famous people in Scottish history, and we can pick anyone we like to do this project on, and we can produce anything we like. So you've got to write a report. No, we can produce anything. Anything we like, but we've got to pick a person and find out about them. So I said, well, who are you going to do? He said, I don't know. William Wallace? There'll be a few William Wallaces getting done. Robert the Bruce? Oh, I'm not sure about that. well, let's have a wee look online. So we had a look online and we found a website about lesser known famous Scottish figures, if you like. And we came across Sonny Bean. And our daughter Eva, who I think might be a goth in the making, was attracted to the story of Sonny Bean and all the various macabre elements to it. But she liked. I like that. I want to do my project on Sonny Bean. So when we then set about discussing what are you going to produce, what do you want to do? Well, I want to write about him. I'll do like maybe a kind of poster, but I want to make his cave as well. You want to make his cave? Yeah, that's the thing I want to take in from a presentation. Sonny Bean's cave, with all his family and all his victims in there. Okay, so we went from the point of using the online spaces we had at our disposal to find out about Sonny Bean. But then we set about the business of finding video clips that explained more about him. We set about the business of looking online to find out how do you make a paper mache cave and how we're going to make these figures. So we brought this project together. Well, Eva brought this project together with a little bit of help from her mum and a little bit of help from myself, who was scratching his head in the background. But we brought this project together, and the day came by where she had to take the project into the school. So she'd made the cave, she'd done the kind of poster presentation and took it in. And we got to go in. All the parents were invited in for this. So you had some folk dressed up as William Wallace, about 3 William Wallace, we were right there. A couple of Robert the Bruce, a few other characters, and then Eva standing there with her Sonny Bean cave. So we looked, and there was a few other, lots of other kids that kind of done something similar, picked someone unknown and done something really interesting. What was quite eye-opening about this, though, was when we were speaking to the teacher afterwards, and the teacher said, "I've never heard of Sonny Bean. Never heard of Sonny Bean. It completely passed me by." And that was really interesting because it made me think, well, what's happening there? Learners at school have been able to make their own choices about what they're going to research. And it was research. They're learning in research-like ways. We talk about research teaching linkages, but they're doing it already. She made the decision about what she was going to research, what was going to be produced. She went online to look at various things that other people had produced to gather the material. And then she took something and it was completely new to the teacher. And that just made me think, well, there's something in this. And it's around the changed roles that are being, and expectations that are being brought about through things like the Curriculum for Excellence and how people are learning in schools. And this whole thing about digital maker pedagogy. So a real eye-opener. And one that's kind of stuck with me as I think about to what extent do we always give students that sort of choice in university and formal higher education? And we do, but to what extent are we really embracing it? There was another thing that very shortly after that, and I won't elaborate this too much, but our eldest daughter started secondary school after the summer. So we got a bit of an insight into how Curriculum for Excellence was happening in secondary school. So Freya came home and said, okay, so we've been doing Stone Age history in a history class, and we've got to produce a project. Okay, what have you got to do? We'll just produce a project. What have they told you? We can do anything. We can write something if we want. We can do a presentation, do a poster. And what do you want to do? I'm going to do a holiday brochure. So she decided to do a holiday brochure about Stone Age history, which she called Stonehaven Holidays. I'm sure that's copyrighted somewhere. And what she did, and this is what the teachers, the direction from the teachers, was to produce anything you like as long as you cover what we've looked at in the class. So this holiday brochure brought together everything that was covered around accommodation. So come to Stonehaven Holidays. We offer you and your family a truly prehistoric experience. Our accommodation, dining, crafts and activities truly take you back in time. Enjoy the following. So we've got accommodation with the proviso that we don't supply materials for your teepee and you might have to fight for a cave. All the information around Stone Age diets, but presented under the Stonehaven Holidays category of fine dining. Catch it yourself. Crafting tools and weapons, fashion workshops for the discerning holidaymaker, and all kinds of other things in between. But this, for me, really encapsulates what's possible and the types of engagement we can get when we say to our learners, here are the rough parameters. Now you go off and you produce something you think is meaningful. The other thing that struck me about the curriculum for excellence and just how learners are learning in schools generally at the moment was I can't remember very much from primary school at all. But we did do a project on Sonny Bean. And we did learn about it through song. And one of the only things I can remember from primary school was the rhyme, Sonny Bean, the hungriest man you've ever seen. And I think that says something about learning creatively and the things that stick with us when we learn in more creative ways. What's the challenge here? I think part of the challenge here is that our learners, our young learners, are engaging in different spaces online to access knowledge, to bring it together. They're using different digital tools and technologies almost intuitively to produce what they want to produce. And they're doing it in a really engaging, enjoyable, meaningful way and producing either real or authentic artifacts. I'm not sure that we do as much of that in higher education as we could. I think that there's lots of good practice around, but I think we've got a real challenge in terms of the generation that's coming through now into higher education who expect to learn in this way and who are experienced in learning this way. I have a real worry that it's either going to be a slap around the face for them, for us, or potentially both. And I think we need to think quite quickly about how we encourage more of our teaching colleagues to make effective and creative use of digital tools and spaces. Not to the exclusion of traditional teaching, but to enhance that, to complement it, and to make sure that our learners are going to be leaving higher education with the digital skills and literacies and the life-wide and the lifelong skills they're going to need both generally and in the professions they're preparing for. I think there's lots of different ways we can think about how we try to engage our teaching colleagues to make better use of digital spaces and tools. I want to share one example from my own experience, which is around the TCEP project. This was a cross-institutional project that we undertook at Napier with 2 partner FE colleges a few years ago. And the focus of the TCEP project was around getting academics, lecturers, to redesign one or more of their own courses. Firstly, to ensure that there were collaborative learning opportunities. Secondly, to ensure that there was meaningful use made of technology to do more than deliver content. And I don't question the delivery of content, but to do more than deliver content. And thirdly, that some aspect of those projects involved a good degree of learner choice and autonomy. So the learners could learn in research-like ways, they could investigate, they could pursue their own lines of inquiry. The TCEP project ran for 2 or 3 years and engaged, I'm not sure how many staff in the end around in terms of redesigning the practice, but it's still got a bit of a legacy that's kind of within the partner institutions and beyond today. And I think part of that was the way in which we tried to approach how the academics harness technology and more progressive approaches in ways that were meaningful to them. How do you contextualise some of these things to the discipline you're in? How do you contextualise some of these things to the fact that, well, you're quite new to using technology and your learners might be 1 or 2 steps ahead of you? One of the things that I worked on in the TCEP project was something at the time was called the 3E approach. This was a framework that was designed to take well-established ideas about scaffolding, lots of support for learners when they're new, and inexperienced, less support over time. It was based on well-established ideas around negotiated learning and how that could be more motivating for students. And it was based around ideas of collaborative practice and the importance of collaborative practice. Now, the 3E approach was based around a sort of 3-stage continuum, if you like. We're at the enhanced level, we're talking about really simple adjustments to teaching practice that just get our learners to be a bit more active and a bit more engaged and take a bit more control. At the extend level, we're talking about new or further developed opportunities that would require the learner to make at least some key decisions, not all the decisions, but at least some key decisions about what they learned, how they learned it, what they were going to produce, and how they'd be assessed. And at the empower level, it was about redesigning teaching from scratch to ensure that it was the learner's needs and interests that were driving the learning experience from the outset. And it was important to us that, at the very least, there would always be peer support opportunities for learners, recognising that they need to know multiple perspectives, need to be able to argue, need to be able to see different viewpoints. But ideally, there would be collaborative learning opportunities. So Our practitioners worked with this and redesigned their courses based on this tool. And it was about recognising that people start and end up at different places, depending on the level of the subject, their own experience, what their students expect. A few years ago at Edinburgh Napier, we were looking to make a significant change across the institution around how technology was used in learning and teaching. And we revisited the 3E approach and redeveloped it as the 3E framework, where we slightly twisted what the 3E approach was about to make it more focused on the use of technology. Here we were talking about adopting technology in simple but effective ways that would get learners to be more active, all the way through to, at the Empower stage, using technology in ways that underpinned higher order individual and collaborative learning activities that reflected as close as possible how the learners would be expected to create, contribute, share, and collaborate around knowledge within the disciplines we're preparing for, and also in the real world more generally. We took a learning and teaching approach to this. We devised a range of examples, all taken from the TSEP project, around essays. What would you do, in terms of engaging students in essays around this continuum? What would you do around seminar participation? So, for example, at the enhanced level, a discussion board where learners are required to post follow-ups to face-to-face seminars, for example, and ask questions. At the extend level, where we're getting them to take more responsibility, 2 or 3 learners each week taking turns to summarise that week's face-to-face discussion and post follow-up questions for the rest of their peers. All the way through to, at the Empower level, having students work in pairs of small groups for them to design and run the seminar. Not for the tutors to do it, but with the tutors in a supporting role. So we developed this framework. We rolled it out across Edinburgh Napier, and thinking that, well, other institutions are facing these challenges, we decided to roll it out more widely as well across the sector, and we made it available as a Creative Commons tool. We were very surprised, I think, initially, when we did do this, at the kind of uptake of the 3E framework. And we found that it started to get used across a number of institutions. So, for example, Plymouth Marjan University College, it's the basis of their institutional strategy around learning and teaching using technology. It's the basis for the technology-enhanced learning quality framework at York St John University. That diagram in the middle, I don't speak a word of Greek, but I trust that says what it's supposed to. That's a Greek translation of the 3E framework that guided a government-funded project in Greece where a number of school teachers from the primary and secondary sectors used the framework to redesign the school curriculum to make more effective use of technology. I'll maybe come back and say a wee bit more on that. I've given you a flavour of how it kind of works in practice. I want to just highlight here that we also looked at how we could use that framework in a curriculum design context as a way of role modelling to our academics or educators how to use technology in their own learning and teaching practice. And this exemplifies how we implemented the 3E framework within our own PG Cert, Aligned in Online Education at Napier, where Module 1 was aligned to the enhanced stage, Module 2, the extend stage, and then Module 3, the point where people left the PG Cert, the Empower stage. And to give you an example of how we approach that, then just to take one line of activities, at the enhanced level, something we call thought discussions, but open discussions where our academics could pick the topic they're interested in, pick the readings they're interested in, and then engage with each other around those kind of shared interests. Moving on to student-led seminars, but then moving on to engagement in online professional communities. And the whole point there was to scaffold a process whereby our learners, who just, in this case, happen to be academics, could be supported to develop their skills and their knowledge, and then quite quickly get to a point where they could look after their own continued professional development. So this activity around joining professional communities involves saying to our academics, pick an online or an online supported community in your discipline area, or one about technology-enhanced learning. Go and join it. Be part of that group. Contribute to it. See what you can learn from that group. And then come back online and share it with everyone else. And so the way in which the group were assessed was that they effectively, between them, created a directory to a whole range of online communities, third space groups, if you like, online, that could support their continued learning once they'd left the programme. But what was really fundamental to us here was that they were joining these communities before they left the programme. They weren't being left to join these communities once they left the programme. And I think there's something here about how we use our digital spaces to engage our learners as early as we can in the professional communities and the discipline-related communities they're going to be joining, so that it's not a big challenge they have to face as they get towards the end of the programme of studies. And there's something in this as well that we were quite interested in, because these examples that I've just kind of shared, these tended to be the examples that most of the people on the programme took into their own practice, whether they were school teachers or college lecturers, university lecturers. These were the things that they pounced upon and said, this could work for me in my context. And I just want to kind of a small note around the use of social media and student-owned technologies, the technologies that are in their hands. There's a lot of talk about the difference between institutionally owned things, the virtual learning environment, where we put our students into modules and give them access to things based on the modules they're part of. And then on the other hand, externally owned tools. Now, lots of debate around this, lots of things around data protection, data ownership, who owns what, who does what. For me, the fundamental difference between some of our institutional technologies and things like LinkedIn or Facebook or openly available kind of wikis or blogs or whatever else you might be familiar with, the fundamental difference is that these external tools allow our learners to cluster around shared interests, and they allow them to self-organise. And self-organisation is absolutely fundamental to effective learning. And it's something that we need to think carefully about in terms of how we bring together institutional tools with the other tools that our learners might be engaged with already. If we want to get the best of both worlds, we have to bring these things together and not worry so much about, well, what are they doing out there? Because it's happening already. My youngest child, Finlay, is at this very moment sitting there engaged in his own digital third space. And what I think we have to, yeah, you can hide. What I think we have to acknowledge there is that sometimes the things that are happening in the digital spaces that our students occupy are a lot more interesting than the things that are happening in spaces like this. Particularly if you're 6 and you've just forfeited your pocket money. There are other opportunities, I think, for how we think about supporting our colleagues to engage with technology. This is another example of how the 3 frameworks currently being implemented, and it's something we're thinking about, something we've discussed. We're early stages discussing, introducing here at UHI. And this is Macquarie University in Sydney in Australia, who have put together a large-scale programme called Design, Develop and Implement, where they're providing direct support for programme teams to rapidly start exploring technologies and new pedagogical approaches and take them all the way through over a period of about 4 to 5 months in redesigning entire programmes. Now, they're harnessing the 3 framework and some other tools in order to do this. I think we need to probably realise that the speed at which learning is developing out with the formal context of the university or colleges means that we need new approaches if we're going to keep up with it. And not just keep up with it, but embrace it and make effective use of it. And we have a problem there, because most universities are locked into either a 3 or sometimes a 5-year cycle of programme design, approval, validation, reapproval. That's fine. But being locked into a 3 or 5 year cycle and having only 3 or 5 year opportunities to overhaul what we do or redesign it substantially does not reflect the speed at which things are moving at in the real world around learning and teaching. We need to be much more agile. We need to have processes in place that are malleable and that can respond to what people need to do when they need to do it. Because I think the generation of learners that are coming into college and university now, they don't care what the technology is called. They don't care how we describe our pedagogy, our learning and teaching approaches. They want to be engaged, and they want to be actively engaged, and they want the opportunity to create things. And I think we need to think really carefully about that. And it's not just us. It isn't just us. There are lots of other institutions and organisations that are concerned about this that aren't within formal higher education. And I don't know if Jane's here, if Jane's made it, Jane Donaldson. I don't think so. My colleague Jane and I, and Julia, when we were at Napier a couple of years ago, found ourselves through a process I'm not quite sure we even understand to this day, working on a large research project around technology-enhanced learning for a major government-funded organisation who wanted to look at how they could embrace technology for their own kind of training needs. We're not allowed to say too much about this. Suffice to say, though, those adverts that are online for join the forces and be the best, if they suddenly start taking a slightly different tone and they start talking about join the army, co-create your own learning experience, be a digital maker, then we might have had some responsibility for that. But there's other well-established institutions and organisations with an interest in learning and development that are realising we need to move much more quickly than we're doing just now, in a meaningful way, not in a knee-jerk way, but we need to move much more quickly than we're doing at the moment. So if we get this right, what are the implications? What are the broader possibilities? I think there are many. There are lots of pedagogical models starting to emerge in the sector that are about just what we've been talking about. Opportunities for learners to be creators, to actively engage, to be engaged in research-like activities and to learn in research-like ways. One of the most important for me, I think, is the Student as Producer initiative at University of Lincoln, where they have taken all their curriculum across the whole university and focused it around research-based learning and teaching. So the learners are the researchers. They're working together, collaborating together on research projects, and they're producing things that are authentic. They're producing social issue reports that have a relevance beyond the course they're on and the people who are going to assess them. They're producing digital artifacts for local businesses. They're doing all kinds of things that really exemplify, at a higher education level, what's happening in schools at the moment. And I think ideas around student as producer, students as researchers, they're a natural extension. They're the natural next step from what's happening through things like the Curriculum for Excellence. And we need to be really careful in how we think about this. We can also think about how we can harness and utilise third spaces, digital third spaces, in terms of interdisciplinary learning. And this is something I learned about from my colleague Peter Hartley, who's here tonight, who's done a lot of work in recent years around programme-focused assessment. And he alerted me to some of the things that were happening across the sector, including at the University of Strathclyde, vertically integrated projects. Projects that go from the first year of an undergraduate degree all the way up to fourth year, where the first years play novice research roles. They're given particular research tasks to do. But the students that are in second year or third year or fourth year take much more responsibility. And your master's students, or sometimes maybe your PhD students, they're the principal investigators. They're directing the projects. But what this is doing is exemplifying just how people learn in the real world. Those that are newer to the discipline engage with the more experienced peers. The more experienced peers take more responsibility over time for what they do and what's produced and where it goes. And when you look at how these projects are assessed and what they're producing, it's much more creative than just a group report. They're producing artifacts, they're producing programs, they're producing things that people can use. And there's something here about how we use our curricula and how we use our approaches to assessment to ensure that our learners are engaging with the wider community in which we sit, and to allow them to contribute things to that wider community, to allow them to produce things for business. Let's not wait till third or fourth year and they're on work placement. Let's look at our assessment practices and think about how we can twist those so they're producing things that are of relevance to the small business down the road, or of relevance to the printmaker down the street, of relevance to the community education project that's looking for some volunteers. We need to really think about this carefully. And I think we have to think very carefully about how we reconceptualise the open learning agenda. Now, many of us in the room will have some familiarity with open education and some of the things that are happening around massively open online courses and things of that type. That's fine. But there was a certain amount of promise when people started talking about open online education. And that promise was around widening access to those who could most benefit from getting access to higher education. What we've seen in most, not all, but what we've seen in most of the examples of large-scale open education initiatives these open online courses. Some of them are very good, but what we've largely seen is them amplifying access to higher education for those that already have degrees, for those that already have qualifications. They've been less about widening access to education for those that are aspiring to get there. One project I worked on while I was at Leeds, Scotland, was the Thinking Digitally online course. Now, Leeds, Scotland, they support learners and their carers to get access to educational opportunities, largely at FE level, sometimes in other contexts. But part of the challenge for some of their learners is that through their disability, they've often found themselves disadvantaged or disenfranchised from the conventional educational system. They don't have perhaps the experience and qualifications that their peers have. So the whole point of Thinking Digitally was to take the idea of open online education and make it relevant to those who are aspiring to get into education. And the basic format was really simple. The learners could come in and tell us what they were interested in. They wanted to be a joiner, or they wanted to get access to an engineering course in college, or they were really interested in the Hibs Football Club. It didn't matter. They could tell us what they were interested in. And the course, through a series of online group and individual activities, supported them to create a digital artefact about the thing they were interested in. Hibs Football Club, being an engineer, getting into hairdressing, whatever they were interested in. Now, this was formally assessed, but this was a small-scale initiative. We couldn't possibly assess and didn't have the subject expertise to assess all the subjects that they were producing their artefacts on. So instead, how we assessed it was to assess them on the digital skills and literacies that they could evidence having developed through producing their digital artefact, through having researched their topic, brought something together and produced something meaningful. And that's what they were assessed on. And what that meant, and it was 12 credits at FE level. But what that meant was that these learners, when they produced these things, they could go into the contexts that they previously would have found difficult and say, okay, I'm interested in getting onto this joinery course. I don't have this qualification or that experience, but here's this digital artefact I produced about a major joinery project that's happening in Edinburgh right now. And here's the proof that I was assessed and can pass coursework at FE level. And here are the digital skills and literacies I developed as a result. And I think this is one small example. There are many more things like this happening. But I think any university or any college that's serious about widening access and the open education agenda needs to look much more carefully, much more seriously at how we can make open education meaningful for those that aspire to get into FE or HE, not for those that have got the qualifications already. They're welcome, but that isn't what this was supposed to be about originally. And I think we need to make more space to look at those that are aspiring to get into education. So moving on from that, what are the implications for how we might develop our universities? First of all, I think we need to take a critical view of where we're at right now. There's some fantastic practice happening across the sector in every university. That isn't under question. But there are things happening in schools and out in society that mean that we're in danger of falling not a couple of steps behind, but really quite a few steps behind. So I think we need to take a critical view of what we want to do and how we might want to rethink the development of our universities. I have a couple of colleagues that are very strong in this area and who I could only aspire to be as kind of thoughtful about around the purpose of higher education. But I would recommend if you're interested in these issues, you look at Richard Hall's blog and also Mark Johnson's blog. Really interesting thoughts around how we might need to reconceptualise what we do over the coming years. Richard's latest post is on academic bewilderment, which is something I've experienced a little bit of tonight and in the run-up to this talk. We also need to be really kind of mindful about some of the things that Crichton alluded to in his introduction. Education isn't just about getting people qualifications. Education is about the development of people and the development of society. And we need to think very carefully about how we balance the need for any institution to stand on its own 2 feet and be able to compete and attract students with the wider mission, the wider social mission of higher education. There's no shortage of evidence about the links between access to education, lifelong learning, and social well-being. and social mobility, if you like that term. I'm not too positive about it, but if you take it for what it can mean. There's also a lot of debate at the moment around access to lifelong higher education, formal and informal, being a really important part of the social contract between ourselves and the state and ourselves and the society within which we exist. And we need to be mindful about what this might mean for an institution like ours that's dispersed across such a big region with such a diverse range of students as well. And I may come back and touch upon a related point. Frank Rennie's alerted me to lots of things since I started here. And one of the things he alerted me to recently, all good stuff I should say, was a recent article by Leslie Riddick, who talks about the People's University of Scotland. Now she's talking mainly in the context of history and people having access to information about the country and where they stay and things. But she was talking about a People's University of Scotland where we could reconceptualise what's available to those in the communities where we're based. So we could have educators going out into society, leading walks around areas of kind of interest, doing talks on things they're particularly interested in. I see Alex is smiling. Alex has been doing this long before this article came out. But there's something important here. There's a debate around what's the wider purpose of higher education, what's the wider purpose of higher education in Scotland. And I think we need to be mindful that some of the best higher education out in the community isn't happening in universities. It often involves people that are moonlighting from their universities, but it isn't happening in universities. A lot of it is happening in places like the Free University of Brighton, who are about to launch a completely free degree in higher education for anyone that's interested. The Social Science Centre in Lincoln, which I believe kind of spun out of some of the ideas that Lincoln University had about the student as producer. And the Ragged University, which Alex Dunedin runs, and which uses third spaces in the community to bring scholars, academics, artisans, hobbyists together with those that are interested in hearing what they've got to say. And if you look at the ethos behind these things, the Free University for Brighton, their tagline, education for love, not money. The Social Science Centre in Lincoln, free cooperative higher education. The Ragged Project, knowledge is power, but only when it's shared. It's gone right back to this notion of education and access to education as a public good. Now, what I find quite difficult, and it kind of tears me in two different directions, having been involved in things like this and being on the fringes of what Ragged does, is that many of our educators from within our universities are engaging in these projects. And when you speak to some of them, and this is only anecdotal, but I've spoken to many of them, they're often getting involved in these things because they want to be an educator in the very broadest sense of the word. They don't want to be tied in just to the courses they're teaching, the modules and programs they're teaching. They believe in education as a social right, as a public good, and they want to exercise their right as educators to practice education in a way that benefits the public. And we need to think about this, because while we're a couple of steps behind around technology, and maybe what's happening in schools at the moment, universities are also potentially being left behind in the wider social mission of education. That isn't to say there isn't good practice. There is. But there are groups out there that are making it their main focus in terms of broadening out access to higher education. And again, I might touch upon some of that as we conclude. There are also some ideas that are starting to emerge which help us think about our on-campus spaces, our digital spaces, our formal and informal education in really quite useful ways. 2 or 3 years ago at Napier, I was fortunate enough to coordinate our Digital Futures consultation across the university, where a number of colleagues came together to talk about the direction Napier wanted to take as a digital university. Not a university that's fully online, but as a university that harnesses good digital practice in any way that it can, where relevant. And I learned about the work of Sheila McNeill at Glasgow Caledonian and her colleague Bill Johnson at Strathclyde around their conceptual matrix for a digital university. Now, this is an idea that's gained a lot of traction over the last 3 or 4 years. And they're talking about reconceptualising university as a digital university where we think about digital participation, both on campus in our courses, but also how our learners contribute and participate digitally out there in society and what they might take into society, how they might engage with public bodies of knowledge, how some of their coursework, instead of writing an essay that two people will mark and never look at again, how some of their coursework might be in the form of papers, articles that are then contributed to public bodies of knowledge, digital bodies. They're also looking at the role of our curriculum. Who owns the curriculum? How should it be dispersed? And they're looking at things like not just information literacy per se, but how do we ensure that the literacies that we help to develop in our students and our learners are the ones that they need. And this is a fastly moving area. But so the challenge is how to make sure that they're set up to at least continue in terms of their own development and look after their own literacy development. So lots of really interesting ideas in here. And I think, without wanting to go into this in any detail, we need to be aware that there's tools out there that can help us think about where we bring together the digital with the physical, where we bring together what we do within our courses and what our students might do out in the wider communities or professions that they're going to join. How we can produce things through the curriculum that might have value to the communities that we sit within, that don't just have value as artefacts of assessment for our students to either pass or fail on. I've been working with Sheila and Bill to look at some of these issues in a wider context. One of the things that we concluded at the end of the Digital Futures consultation in Napier is that a useful way to think about some of these things, digital third spaces, learners engaging with communities they're going to join, us not having to create all the material but introducing activities where the learners create things that are value to others, was around this concept of the digitally distributed curriculum. A curriculum that would involve using digital spaces to have programme-wide projects that would use digital spaces to make sure that a group of engineers that are here can connect with, learn with and produce things with a group of business students that are there. And that would use digital spaces to take the outcomes of that work and make it available publicly wherever possible, or make it available in the form that is of use to a small business down the street that's trying to get started. We can talk about, particularly in a region like the Highlands and Islands, of the importance of our education provision having an impact on the economy and the businesses that are in our area and the groups that are in our area. We have to be really careful, I think, and other universities have to be careful, that that impact isn't coming towards the end of people's programmes of studies, or that impact isn't thought about purely in terms of the skills they're taking into their discipline areas. We can think about how they can use digital spaces and other approaches to learning and teaching so that impact can happen as soon as possible through their course of studies. And the other thing that interested us about this whole notion of a distributed curriculum and learners producing artefacts was around this notion of digital scholarship for students. We talk quite a lot about digital scholarship and approaches to digital research and sharing good practice for our academics. But if we want to really capitalise on some of the ways in which learners are being engaged in school at the moment, then we need to think about digital scholarship for our students. The digital channels that allow them to communicate what they're learning and communicate it before they get to the point of going to a job interview. Something to think about there. So we're into the last 10 minutes or so. I want to sort of just consider, how do we think about ourselves in this big picture? How do we think about our academics in terms of developing our own educational practice and scholarship? How do we use digital spaces and digital approaches to do some of the things that Crichton talked about at the start, to bring forward staff and help them engage in their own research and scholarship, to get their learning and teaching work out there, to share their good practice? There's a few things we're doing at UHI at the moment and a few things that we can draw upon from elsewhere. The first, I think, is we've absolutely got to role model what's possible. I mentioned the PG Cert in blended and online education that I was involved in Napier. Myself and my colleague Christina Mainka, and then latterly Julia Fotheringham, when we worked on this programme, we were really, really keen that as a programme for educators, it should absolutely role model the range of ways in which they could use technology to engage their own learners and give them an experience that would allow them to make informed choices. We talk about alignment a lot in higher education and making sure that what we want our learners to learn is aligned with how we teach them and how we assess them. There's lots of really good programmes for educators out there. If we're talking about the value of collaboration and engaging our learners in digital spaces. And we ask our academics on education programs to read about collaboration and to write about collaboration and its importance, not to do any collaboration. There's a bit of an issue there. Okay, we're talking about academics. They can conceptualize, they can think about how knowledge might apply to situations, but how are they going to understand the nuances of these approaches? How are they going to understand the do's and do nots if we don't provide them with an experience that allows them to engage digitally? Or, if we're leaving the digital aside, if we're not providing them with an experience that gets them to engage in the ways that our learners are increasingly being engaged, and the ways we'd like to engage our learners. So we need to think really carefully about this. And I think it goes to our staff. It goes not just through talk programs for staff. It goes to things like our staff development provision. You can go to different universities and you can see good workshops on using technology, good workshops on how to create spaces for collaborative learning. Why don't we just do some of these things online and let people experience it? Particularly in an institution like this, where we are so distributed. But the surest shortcut, I think, to help our academics to take forward the practice in ways that reflect how the world's changing at the moment, the surest shortcut is to let them experience it. Because when you experience something, you have a much more immediate understanding of it than if you read about it, and then read another article about it, and then speak to someone about it. So there's something here we need, for the sector, there's a challenge. How we support our academics in terms of developing their educational practice has to be authentic. It has to role model what's possible. We can also look at how we use digital spaces to share good practice. And as we come to the conclusion of this, we are progressively moving away from the original idea of a third space. But some of what's in that idea we need to adopt. So we're a distributed university. We've got some really good spaces for sharing good practice. We've got the Educational Development Unit Toolkit, where resources can be shared. It's something we're thinking about harnessing in relation to the professional framework for recognising good practice that Crichton mentioned. This is our Alpine framework. And this will be a framework that allows us to give our academic and academic-related colleagues fellowship of the Higher Education Academy. Now, usually that process involves a form, a pro forma. You complete, you talk about your practice, it's assessed. We want to do something a little bit different in addition to that. We want to make sure that at least some of the evidence that our academics put forward is in the form of shareable, reusable digital artefacts. It might be a top tips article that they write for one of our, the Learning and Teaching Academy's website. It might be a podcast or a screencast they do. It might be an assignment specification for a piece of group work that they found works really effectively. But let's get some of that and let's share it. Sharing good practice across one institution, a single institution on a single site, is hard enough. I think we do really well in UHI to share a good practice, but I think there's further things we can do. And harnessing opportunities for professional recognition have to be brought together with opportunities to share that good practice in an easy, accessible way. We need to create new opportunities to connect. One of the cross-institutional projects that I've been involved in recently with my colleagues Panos Vlahopoulos, David Walker, Karen, a few others here were involved in it, was to create an open online course for educators around the way in which education is changing globally. We're getting near the point of having this ready. We developed this course through a process of action research. We've spoken to educators around the world about what educators need to know in today's context. And we'll have this ready probably within the next 6 months. We'll pilot the course as an open online course, and then that course will be made available as an open educational resource. We'll package it up, and anyone that wants to use that in any institution, anywhere in the world, can take it. Use it for staff development. They can use it as part of their own teaching qualifications for staff. But we need to think about how we can harness digital spaces to provide new opportunities. So not just talking to each other, but actually providing opportunities for our academics and teaching professionals to connect with others around the world, to talk about common challenges and to learn from each other. And that's another way we can try and keep at least on a level with what's happening at the moment, I think. We can think about scholarship and how we can approach this in more collegiate, friendly, open ways. Some of those things that characterise the nature of the third space, where your previous experience and your social status doesn't matter so much. There's a lot of status in scholarship, there's a lot of status in academia, and there's a lot of status around journals, the journals that people might publish in. So another initiative that myself, again working collaboratively with colleagues elsewhere, Karen Strickland at Robert Gordon University, David Walker at Sussex. A couple of years ago, we developed the Journal of Perspectives in Applied Academic Practice. This is an open online journal, and its main reason for existing is to provide opportunities for academics who've yet to share the learning and teaching practice to do so. We've got rid of some of the traditional conventions of academic publishing. There isn't blind review. When you send your paper into review, you know who's reviewed it, they know you. And that opens up the possibility for a supportive dialogue about the work to make sure that we can help our academics get their teaching work out there. We're looking to build relationships with the journal here at UHI. Frank Rennie's joining the editorial steering group. Gary and myself have discussions about how we can harness it in terms of our own kind of scholarship. And at the moment, later this month, we have a special issue coming out on the theme, Learning and Teaching in the Distributed University. A theme we picked quite deliberately for its relevance to UHI. And we have a number of colleagues who will have papers in that journal that will exemplify what they're doing with technology in terms of their own learning and teaching, alongside other papers that will feature from individuals elsewhere. But when we think about supportive spaces, when we think about spaces where status doesn't matter, where it's just about getting good work out there, we can harness that in relation to our own scholarship as well, which is what this has been about. So the broader implications for UHI, what might they be? Well, Crichton mentioned the kind of laboratory of UHI, or the natural laboratory, as our Dean of Learning and Teaching, Gary Campbell, refers to it. You'll see you've been credited there, Gary. I take no credit for this description, although I like it very much. So this, we're a multi-campus institution. We have online delivery. We've got delivery of specialist courses at specialist locations. We deliver courses across multiple campuses. We've got opportunities where learners are learning in the field. And actually, where our geography means that we can offer subjects that other universities would find difficult or impossible to offer. That's really important in terms of how we think about where might UHI stand going forward if we want to build upon already excellent practice here in ways that make best use of our digital spaces and the physical spaces where we sit. We've got an as yet unbuilt education lab at the Beechwood campus, the lab that Crichton referred to, which we're putting together at the moment to provide a space to research and develop our pedagogic practices. We want to use this lab to harness the natural lab we've got and learn as best we can about how to do this, distributed learning, open learning, community-based learning in a really meaningful way. And again, build upon the excellent work that's around the institution. And there's some fantastic work. The Centre for History, our colleagues in literature in Inverness College, and a lot of public engagement work, going out there doing talks with the public. There's the work that Lewis Castle College are doing around trying to take the college Wi-Fi and expand it, broaden it out across the whole town. Again, opening up those spaces and making those spaces third digital spaces for those that might want to use them. So there's no shortage of good things happening, but there's lots of potential too, though. We're involved in the Open Education Resources University. We're on the steering group of the Open Educational Practices in Scotland project. And this brings with it a really good opportunity to look at our natural resources, look at our natural lab, look at the technology we've got. And I think it gives us an opportunity to make the open education agenda more meaningful. Because at the moment, as I mentioned, we're talking about open education largely in terms of open online. There's a real opportunity for a university like ours to grasp that open access and open education agenda, shake it about a bit, and talk about how it could be more meaningful in terms of not just online, but on campus. I think we need to think about what would Open UHI mean. As a multi-campus institution that's across this huge area of the country, I think we need to think about what might Open UHI mean in terms of the fact we've got campuses all over the place. We're resource rich. As custodians of technology and learning opportunities, we're richer than many of the universities that are technically richer than us. And we need to think about how we can harness that. I think we should build upon the good practice we've got and quite seriously consider not just strategies around things like public engagement and the research we do. I think we should quite seriously consider a strategy for public pedagogy, where we can build upon the range of things that are happening at the moment and the natural resources we've got to really exemplify to the sector what this could really be about. So back to the People's University of Scotland that Leslie Riddick wrote about recently, and back to our natural lab. I really want to go over there and talk to some of this, but they told me I've got to stand still at this lectern. So who's best placed to realise the ideas around the People's University for Scotland within the Scottish HE sector? Could it be Edinburgh? It could be Edinburgh University, very rich, but largely based in Edinburgh with a few outposts elsewhere. There's lots of universities that think like us, got a broad, wide and access agenda. Old University in Napier is certainly one of them. Some fantastic work happening there. UWS, University of the West of Scotland, like us in that they've got distributed to a certain extent rurally. But if we're going to talk about the idea of a People's University of Scotland, I don't think we need to look much further than what's on that map there. I don't think there's another institution that is naturally as well placed to do this and to really exemplify what open education and public education and education as a public right could be about. And we could talk about things, to return to the idea of the digitally distributed curriculum. Like many universities, we're looking at developing online courses, usually at kind of master's level, and that makes lots of sense in lots of ways. I think we need to ask ourselves, though, as any university does, what would attract a student to do an online master's programme in subject X at UHI versus doing the same programme, or a very similar one, at another institution? I think what's going to attract them is things like this. I think what's going to attract people is the extent to which we use our natural laboratory, our engagement and our place within the community and the communities across the University Highlands and Islands to provide a meaningful educational experience, where we might have our alumni who are now working in any part of the world come in and contribute to master's programmes or online teaching, where we might look at the relationships between curriculum and the local economy, where we could offer our online students and our on-campus students an opportunity to do coursework and undertake activities that they know, because we've told them we guarantee it, will have a relevance to businesses or third sector groups. We are much more connected and have much more opportunity to do this than many universities do. And when we think about the universities that seem to be leading the way around open education practice, they're resource rich, but they're not as naturally rich as we are in terms of opportunity to really exemplify how this could work. Why is it so important? My last couple of points, really. When we think about how to better harness our third spaces for engaging our learners, whether they're digital third spaces or whether they're on-campus spaces, what we're really doing is increasing our capacity to create pivotal moments for our learners in terms of their own learning and their own development. And pivotal moments that will enrich and expand the educational experience for everyone, for them, but also for the organisations they'll enter, for the jobs they want to do, for the communities they sit within. And I really strongly believe, and this is the heart on the lapel moment, that while we need to teach in higher education, more often than not, our role is a supporting role. And I think what we're trying to do is support our learners to have a series of pivotal moments. A pivotal moment might be going to a talk at the Ragged University on artisan chocolate making and say, I want to do that. Or, as I did recently, a talk at the Ragged University about bilingualism and the benefits of learners when they're young learning 2 languages. And then me thinking, I should really take my daughter's French homework more seriously. They can be pivotal moments. I'm standing here because of a pivotal moment. Crichton mentioned that I went to, as an undergraduate, really quite a progressive, forward-looking HE college. I did okay at school, pretty well, but nothing spectacular. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And I applied for one course, which was a course I went on to at Queen Margaret, the information management course. And back in those days, you did a written exam as well, to write an essay question. And I remember talking to the admissions tutor who interviewed me, who was a colleague that Kathy and Jim will remember fondly. And he said, you've only applied for one course, why is that? And I explained why I'd applied for that course and why I was interested in that course in particular. He said, okay, and what will you do if you don't get in? And I said, I'll "Oh, I'll probably apply next year." And he said, "Yeah, I can see that about you." So he said, "You seem to know why you want to do this course. I've looked at your kind of written work. You can write a bit. Okay, we'll take a punt on you." And I think that shows how pivotal, what the importance of pivotal moments. And I think it shows how fragile things are as well. And had I not got into that course, and then been encouraged to think about a PhD, and then to do a PhD, I wouldn't be standing here now. And I'm not standing here because I went to a particular course at a particular college. I'm standing here because of the nature of the people that were running that course. So we just need to think really carefully about some of this. Another pivotal moment for me was doing my PhD, and had that almost inevitable point of crisis that everyone seems to have where I was going to drop out, until one Vicky Caulfield of Formby said, "You've not come this far just to finish now. You bloody get it done. I'm not listening to you talking about this, about your failed PhD for the next however many years." So pivotal moments. And I think our responsibility as lecturers, as academics, yes, teach, but support. And support our learners to have a series of pivotal moments, and support them to stitch together a fabric of pivotal moments that will take them where they need to be. There is a proviso to all of this. In thinking about the wider implications of open and inclusive educational practice and the community dimension, this talk isn't about suggesting that universities should be all kinds of things to all kinds of learners. That's not practical, and that would be, I think, irresponsible. However, this talk is suggesting that universities can and should be doing much more to contribute to the wider social mission of education and have a much broader and richer impact within our communities. I think UHI does this probably better than any university in Scotland I can think of, and that attracted me here. But actually, in terms of really pushing boundaries and pushing things forward, we're the university that should be doing more of this and being seen to do more of it as well. I did have some conclusions, but the points I've kind of covered, so I don't really feel the need to labour them and keep you from food and wine. So I'll just leave them up there for a second. And I think I'll conclude with a question that I think anyone in higher education should be asked, whether we're in a lecturing role, an academic support role. If we have a role in higher education to support learning and teaching, there's a question I think we should all be asked, and we should all ask ourselves. Where is your third space, and what will you do there? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Keith. An excellent presentation. And I'm conscious of time, and we've got a couple of other small bits of proceedings to go through, but I think we could take maybe 2 or 3 questions, if you're happy to do
Absolutely,
that.
yeah.
From the floor. Any questions? Roddy.
Keith, thanks for that talk. Just one question, maybe a bit provocative, but I'd like your thoughts on it. Do you think education suffers from a tyranny of qualifications?
Yeah. Actually, I do, but do you mean whose education, though?
Formal education, schools, colleges, universities.
I think to an extent. I think there are ways to think more smartly about the journeys that learners might take, and providing a more joined-up experience from school through college, through university to industry. Actually, my sister-in-law, who's here, and who works for Queen Margaret University, runs one of their academies, which is doing just that. It's a partnership between industry and university. It's about providing kind of linear pathways from school, through college, through a degree, into employment for those learners that know what they want to do. And I think we need to think very carefully about the boundaries that we put between school, FE, HE, professional qualifications. I think we also need to think quite carefully about the nature of our qualifications with respect to the broader development of our learners as well. And also to probably take a strong look at the repetition, even within a single degree programme. Some of the work that Peter's been involved in are in programme-focused assessment approaches, where you look at the spread of assessment that learners are undertaking, and what they've been assessed on. And more often than not, in any particular academic year, they've been assessed on, they've had pretty much 80% the same types of assessment. They've often been assessed at exactly the same time on exactly the same or very similar learning outcomes. I think there are some of the issues we need to tackle. I think it's about coherent curriculum design. I think it's about people talking to one another. Now, I mentioned the modular system earlier. I think there's benefits to the modular system, but one of the big drawbacks is that it locks individual lecturers into thinking about what they're teaching and how they're going to assess. And unless we counter it, there isn't often much discussion around how does this module relate to this other module or class in the same programme. And I think there's lots to do around the coherence, even within our programmes, before we start looking at series of qualifications. But yeah, I broadly agree with that assertion.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Frank?
As you know, I'm a great advocate of openness in education. But when I was putting together the first degree programme at UHI, I got into a bit of hot water because I said that the entry qualification should be that you're 16-year-old and alive. What do you think the barriers in education should be?
What should the barriers be? Well, I think our main concern, I don't think I can name the barriers, but I think I can say how we should think about them. And I think we should think about allowing people educational opportunities where they can evidence that they're interested and that they have the raw skills, and I think raw skills is fine, to be able to deal with the work we're asking them to do. And where we can make judgments about the types of support we can provide to learners that may be coming in with non-conventional qualifications, who might have other types of life experience that are important. I like the idea of you need to be 16 and alive. I think you need to be 16, alive, curious and keen. But I think we need to think carefully about being inclusive without disadvantaging people that might be taking the wrong road in terms of the qualifications we offer them. So that's not really the answer to the question, and I think I need to think about it. But it's maybe giving an insight into some of the things I think we should think about to try and answer that question.
Okay. Could I ask one, Keith? You mentioned the massive open online curricula and the way they became skewed really towards master's level activity. You maybe a bit cynical to say, but towards really marketing tools. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of expectation, even within that space, coming from the UK government. Do you think that the drivers for this sort of shift and coming back to open education and the purpose of open education, do you think the drivers at a political government funding council level are there in the right way at the moment? Or are the universities like UHI and Queen Margaret and Napier having to pioneer in still quite a difficult space politically and reputationally?
I think they are having to pioneer in a difficult space, and I think universities like Napier or like ourselves are pioneering in a space that made all the more challenging because we don't have the resources that some institutions have in terms of finance and the kind of groups of elite universities come together to do some of these things. However, at the same time, I think institutions that are rooted in their communities, like ours, I think institutions that have got a strong widen and access agenda and ethos are going to be the institutions that take this forward in a meaningful way. There's a challenge at the moment, which I think is still early days. And I think there are an awful lot of initiatives that are about massive open online courses, other big open education initiatives that are really, at this stage, whether we admit it or not, just about the sector trying to figure out what the potential of these things might be. So Edinburgh University, for example, have done some really fantastic work. Some of the work has been about marketing the paid courses they want students to come onto. But they're also quite open, I think, in saying that we've invested so many millions of pounds in this because we want to research the phenomena of large-scale open education. They're in a position where they can do that. I think universities like ours, like Napier, institutions like UWS, Glasgow Caledonian, I think we're in a much better position to show how it should be done, and how it can be done in a way that is about opening up access to education for those that are aspiring to get there, but maybe don't have the conventional qualifications and experiences. And at the moment, for me, and I'm cynical about this, or certainly about some aspects of it, I think there is a lot of academic showboating going on around open educational developments at the moment. I think a lot of institutions that are trying to show that they're the biggest, they're the best, they're the most forward-thinking, they're all doing the same thing. I think there's a real opportunity and there's a space to be occupied by institutions like ours. And I think there's a real opportunity for an institution like ours to reclaim the open education agenda, because it's been skewed. We're talking about open education and we're almost exclusively, without even acknowledging it, and implicitly we're talking about open online education. I think where it's really going to be one, and where progressive practice is going to happen, is where we think about the open online alongside the open on campus, the open in the community. And it's still a big challenge. Frank and I were talking about this and about how changes in kind of government and funding meant that we kind of lost the community high school and the colleges that did night classes. But there's a fundamental problem here if we want to treat education as a public good and if we want to take it forward. When the rest of the world becomes free, when they've got time, we close. Not we as individually, but institutions close. Come 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, Monday to Friday and weekends, corridors full of dead space, rooms full of computers that aren't turned on, libraries that are open, which is great. But we talk about open, and universities talk about we want to be an internationally known university. We want to be a global university. Be a community university first. Serve the people on your doorstep. And I think these big institutions investing in large-scale open education initiatives are missing that or choosing not to attend to it. But I think we are best placed of all the universities I can think of in Scotland to actually show how that should be done.
Thank you. I'm not going to call on another round of applause for Keith because I'm going to ask Gary Campbell, first of all, to give a vote of thanks. Could I just say that obviously there is a networking event after this, a reception, so if any of you have questions for Keith, I'm sure you will
Absolutely.
welcome a queue.
Could I just say something very briefly? When things finish later on at 8 o'clock, I know a lot of people have travelled to this, so I really appreciate it. Just a quick mention. Oh, the slides aren't up. The Glenmore Hotel across the bridge and along to the left. 8 o'clock onwards, if you'd like to come along for a first drink on me and some additional food and a bit more of a chat, then please feel free to do so. Sorry.
Thanks very much. So I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of all the people in the room here and the people at the video conference to offer a sincere thanks to Professor Smythe for what was, I was expecting something good, Keith, because we've had a lot of chat, but that was really inspirational and challenging. I was kind of worried until he did the proviso at the end. He's gone completely over the top, really brought it back and grounded it. And listening to Keith made me think of two things from his interview. One thing that when we were talking to him in the interview, it came across that he really knew his stuff. He was very enthusiastic and he had a really engaging, open personality, all of which made him an ideal candidate. And the other thing I noticed, but he wasn't wearing a tie. And it's good to see that either of those two things have changed. So thanks very much for that, Keith. I'd like to ask Professor Frank Renning now to welcome Professor Smythe into the UHI Professoriate. Thank you.
Professor Mark Arden. Alles kan bij ons show nog kolud, volgens mij. Adanch, Keith Smythe, the Stapalats and Chi. Thank you for coming. In the short time that Keith has been UHI, I'm very pleased to say he's become a friend as well as a colleague. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome him into the Professoriate. But a few words of what that means. The Professoriate, it sounds like the Stasi. Something from Kafka, perhaps. The media have an image that they project of the professor that says the professor is a bespectacled, well, certainly, eccentric individual who is very clever but who has certain absent-minded tendencies and so on and so forth. I'm here to assure Keith that certainly the innovation and the intelligence are expected, that the eccentricity is not mandatory, although it may be handy when you're coming back home and you forget the messages that Vicky's actually could pick up at the thing. It's always a good excuse to bring it in. So what is a professor? The professor, quite simply, is the highest rank in education, in higher education, in the Western world. And that's not an understatement. It's a question that's often put to us. If you've reached the highest rank, Keith, it's not all downhill from here. But the question is, what is it? What do you get? You get certainly honours, but there are many other honours that are offered towards an academic, special awards, visiting awards, guest awards, and so on. And that's really the small beer, because the professorial title itself is the coin. And what you get is the respect of your peers, because the professorial title, unlike many others in society, is actually only awarded not only because you're qualified, but because your peers decide that you should actually be honoured in this way. So what do professors do? Well, of course, the media say, quite simply, that they're boffins. It's one of my hate words. What does that mean? That often means that they're very clever, they know a lot of things in a lot of depth, but they won't tell you anything unless they come to your seminars. You're expected to lead key areas of your own subject matter. You're expected to do advanced research, and particularly, I think, you're expected to coach and bring on junior members of staff and postgraduate students. But above all, I think, you have to be ambassadors. Ambassadors for the institution and for the subject. You're expected to be aspirational in your role and to do things that are cutting edge, to think the unthinkable. It's one of the great privileges in life to be told you can go away and think the unthinkable. It's always my excuse. You're supposed to have high expectations, and you also have the privileges that go with that. And one of the key privileges is being able to put professor instead of doctor on your credit card. And the advantage of doing that is that when you get into a hotel at 2 o'clock in the morning, you don't get a knock on the door with someone with a bad back waiting for the doctor to help you. UHI has in its short career, produced, we now have about 30-odd professors. 30-odd professors, that's bad. 29-odd ones and me. Those who've been involved in UHI know that it's not just the 3-year project since we got a title. It's been a 20-something year struggle to get recognition and to come from our roots to do the things that Keith was talking about tonight. I think it's incredibly important to realise that we now have lead academics in the country in the areas of marine science, of education, of archaeology, of Nordic studies, and a whole variety of other disciplines. I think it's important to realise that the Professor of Pedagogy is now a member of the Professoriate. So, Keith, welcome.
Keith, congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. There is a reception, so please, we'll see all of you outside, and Keith will circulate, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks.